What do you do when a zealous college student is locked and loaded with facts that he believes utterly debunks Christianity and the Bible based off information he found off the internet? You listen and you teach. In this video, Frank Turek finds himself in that exact predicament. I'm going to share my thoughts as we go. Watch this.
Believe in the resurrection.
If you don't, well, I guess my question would be, why wouldn't you trust these ancient texts if you evaluate them and you come to the conclusion they're historically reliable? Why would this be invented? That kind of thing. Go ahead.
You don't come to the conclusion that they're historically reliable.
Okay, my question would be, why do you think they're not?
Because they were written 100, 200 years later.
Later than what?
Later than when Jesus was crucified.
Where did you come up with those dates?
Google.
Huh?
I just looked it up. It was like 100. It was written, or published, the Hebrew Bible was published around 100 AC. He was killed in 30 AC. The life expectancy is probably shorter then. And it said it was published, so that's like 7 years. They were already 30 or 40, so they're either old and senile or dead, so.
Run those dates by me again.
It was 100 when the Hebrew Bible was published about, because we don't actually know. And then 30 when he was killed.
The Hebrew Bible, you mean the Old Testament?
No, it said, well, how would they publish the Old Testament after he died?
No, we have Old Testament documents prior to Jesus.
Okay.
We have the Septuagint, which was 250 BC. So that's 250 years prior to Jesus. We have the whole, we have Dead Sea Scrolls. We have a scroll, the entire book of Isaiah from like 150 BC. So the Old Testament's written before Jesus. You get that, right?
Yeah, but when was it published? Do you know?
What do you mean published?
Well, yeah, I can show you what it said. Like it said, it was.
If it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, we're gonna get back to the video. But if you're arguing with somebody and they're pulling out their phone to respond to your argument, they have no earthly idea what they are talking about. They're completely biased and they've picked information to confirm their bias. At this point, if you're well versed in what you know, when they do that, just continue to educate and teach them and watch what happens. Check this out.
When was the Bible published?
Okay. First of all, the documents we call the New Testament were written anywhere between, say, 40 AD and I believe 70 AD. Okay? Jesus was crucified in 33 AD. Okay? Now, the sources inside those documents go all the way back to the event of the resurrection itself. In fact, the earliest evidence for the resurrection is recorded in a passage we call 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, where Paul says, "What I received of first importance I pass on to you." So Paul is writing in about 55 AD to the church at Corinth in Greece, and he's quoting a section that was memorized that even atheistic scholars agree goes all the way back near 33 AD. And that section talks about who Jesus appeared to after he was resurrected. So, despite the fact that Paul is writing it in 55 AD, about 22 years after the resurrection event, the data that Paul is writing down goes all the way back to the event itself. It would be like today if you wanted to write a history of, say, 9/11, which is 22 years ago. And you went and interviewed eyewitnesses. Some of them are in this room. And they told you what happened. Would it matter that you wrote it 22 years later? Or would the source from the event itself be authoritative?
You could lose it in translation from what they saw memorized for 20 years and then you publish.
You could misremember things, but there's something known as an impact event. An impact event is something you don't forget. You might forget what you had for breakfast this morning, but you won't forget something that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. Now, you're not. There may be a couple of us in here that are this old. Let me ask a question. Only a few of you are going to raise your hand. How many people in here can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963? Raise your hand and hold it up. You see these people with their hands up? These people are very old, okay? November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. And I'm standing in the living room in our home in Wanamassett, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see in my mind right now my mother when she was 26 years old, sitting on that ottoman. She's 86 today, but I can see her when she was 26. I remember what I said to her. And I remember what she said to me. And that was 60 years ago. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? You remember where you were and what you were doing. Why? Because it was an impact event.
I love that point about impact events. I remember where I was when 9/11 happened. I was a freshman in high school in JROTC class, ruffling through my book bag, looking for a notebook when my teacher turned on the TV and he had a ghostly expression on his face. He saw the first plane hit the towers, and he served in the military, so he was deeply affected by this. Our school let out. I went home and watched the rest of the footage in disbelief on my TV downstairs. That was almost 23 years ago, and I can go on and on about it, but that's an impact event. You don't forget that. Now imagine doing life with Jesus for 3 years, watching him get arrested, then crucified, only to witness Jesus be resurrected from the dead. That is life altering. One would not forget that. But if anyone is wondering why the books of the Bible were written 10, 20 years, some even longer than that, after the resurrection, well, just read the book of Acts. These individuals, the disciples, were doing ministry, getting persecuted. It was a lot going on. It's a miracle that any of the New Testament books are written. Paul was in prison half the time. They were doing ministry. But by the way, where were you when 9/11 happened? Put that in the comment section.
Rose from the dead. Do you think that would have been an impact event?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think they would have forgotten about it? Do you think they would have had any trouble remembering what he said and did?
Possibly.
Probably not, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so just like you can interview people here today about 9/11 and get an accurate account, so could the New Testament writers, and many of them were eyewitnesses themselves. So I don't know where you're reading this kind of thing, but the New Testament documents are written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, by eyewitnesses or people that knew eyewitnesses. For example, Luke, who was a doctor and interviewed eyewitnesses, actually puts forth a very accurate account of what he said he saw, and you can verify this by looking at archaeological remains and geographic remains and topography from the Gospel of Luke and also the book of Acts. In fact, there's 84 details in the book of Acts alone that have been proven to be eyewitness data just from chapter 13 to chapter 28, the end of the book. Luke was actually traveling with Paul. He's an eyewitness of that period. So you're right. You know, if this was 100 or 200 years later, we might be skeptical of it. But when we have eyewitnesses and eyewitness data that can be confirmed, that's telling us that this really could be true. Let me say one other thing. We just did a podcast on this 2 days ago. It's the podcast up right now, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. There have been 7 people associated with the crucifixion of Jesus found in archaeology. 7 of them, including Jesus himself. Jesus, Caiaphas, Simon of Cyrene, Pilate, Herod, Peter, and one other I can't remember right now. 7 names from the first century have been found in the dirt that are mentioned in the crucifixion account of Jesus. All told, there are more than 30 names in the New Testament that have been found in archaeology and other writings from the time. This is not an invented story. Go ahead.
But that, just because their names are there doesn't mean he rose from the dead.
No, it doesn't. But it does show that they're telling historical facts. And so if people can be trusted on where you can verify them, you probably ought to trust them where you can't. Now, if Jesus really did rise from the dead, would you follow him?
Yeah. With, I knew you were gonna say you were gonna ask this earlier.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Okay,
Like,
well, how much reading have you really done on this?
not a ton.
Okay, so think about it just,
Yeah. Read.
just for a second. Regardless of whether he rose from the dead or not, let's just think about it this way. Jesus of Nazareth, inarguably, is the most influential human being in history.
Yeah.
True?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
Christianity.
Now, if we're going to consider ourselves people who are going to follow the truth wherever it leads, you have to at least check this out, right? You have to do some reading. You have to try and figure out, did this really happen? Otherwise, if we don't, I don't think we can really consider ourselves people who are pursuing truth.
Wow. I can't imagine being an unlearned novice college student arguing with a PhD Bible teacher and apologist. Either this young dude is extremely arrogant or extremely ignorant. Probably a little bit of both. This is the epitome of don't talk about what you don't know a lot about. I mean, this kid has done very little reading on this subject, yet he's arguing and talking as if the Bible isn't reliable. The Bible is beyond reliable. The Bible is trustworthy. The entire New Testament was written before the last apostle died, which was Apostle John. And to Frank's point, the historical facts and archaeological finds are corroborated and proven beyond dispute. They found things like Caiaphas' tomb, Peter's mother's house, inscriptions of Pilate, Pontius Pilate, all these people that the Bible speaks about, things that they've seen and read about in the Bible has been found and corroborated by archaeologists. If these historical facts are indeed true, written by the eyewitnesses and close companions, but the resurrection part isn't true, then at this point, we're just picking and choosing what we want to believe and what we believe is true. If we simply consider the fulfilled prophecies alone proves the Bible's trustworthiness, I mean, read Psalm 22, read Isaiah 7, Isaiah 9, Isaiah 53, all these texts, these messianic texts that were written hundreds of years apart from each other and hundreds of years before Christ was born. How does David know about nails in the hand and being pierced in the side and in the feet when crucifixion wasn't even invented yet? It is only possible by God. Don't be like this college student. Don't be arrogant and just believe everything you read off the internet. But on the other hand, be like this college student and be willing to listen. He listened to Frank, and I pray that some seeds were sown in this young man's mind, that he goes back home and he thinks about it and fruit is produced from this, and he actually follows the evidence where it leads and come to the conclusion that the resurrection is in fact true. Jesus is alive, and if he puts his faith in Jesus, he will be saved. Ultimately, evidence is just one part of the deal. It's all about prayer. So let's pray for this young man. He has a lot of life to live, Lord willing. Pray that he finds God at some point in his life, and pray that he becomes one of those apologists that goes back to schools and sows seeds of truth. If you enjoyed this video, you want more content like this, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Like this video. I'll be back next week with another one. This is Pastor Frederick. This is About a Book. Peace.